Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. And yes, I am a king now. DMs are the linchpin in any game of Dungeons & Dragons, or any other tabletop RPG for that matter. They create the world, NPCs, and stories we all love to play through. Though sometimes there are some DMs that are just less than desirable, or just plain bad. Much like the examples in these next 3 D&D horror stories. But first, I would like to present the return of the like and comment kitten. Well, I suppose like and comment cat is more appropriate now. He's really growing fast. Though, with that out of the way, let's get right into these stories. DM neuters my character for not being a stereotype. By Reddit user, Nilvanas. A couple of years ago, I was playing a lawful good paladin. Our party consisted of me, a sorcerer, a cleric, and a bard warlock. Though, they aren't that important to the horror part of the story. I loved playing with all of them. They played their characters amazing, and we ended up having great relationships between the characters. The real horror of the story was the DM. My character's whole thing was rooting out the heresy in his church, but to start out, I had him as part of the town guard, so he could get experience in the law, and what he's supposed to do. The DM felt like this made a lot of sense, so whenever we were in town, and he'd see someone breaking the law, he'd bring them in. By the time we reached a higher level, I want to say around 5 or 6, his church thought that he was experienced enough to become an internal enforcer / inquisitor, and he left the town guard. Whenever the party would travel somewhere where they had a church / temple, they'd do a little side quest to investigate and determine if there was anyone in the temple that needed to be taken care of. Usually, it was small things like embezzlement, and just reporting it was enough. The DM would also take point in having me notice whenever something happened in town, such as a robbery, muggings, etc. My character, who's no longer got any authority in his town for that, let alone other towns, decided that the local guard could take care of that. After all, my paladin was dealing with heresy and not petty thievery. He told me 2 or 3 times that being left good meant that I had a moral duty to uphold the law, despite not following a deity whose focus was on the law. I let him know that my character didn't have jurisdiction, and that he would leave it up to those who did. Eventually, in one of the towns we visited, we found a cult that was pretending to be followers, but secretly in the night they were performing unholy rituals and sacrifices. Needless to say, my paladin was not going to stand for this, and they were going to take action. Purging the temple of these heretics didn't take too much effort. But in the end, when everyone was dead, he decided that he was going to pray to his god to cleanse the temple, and to forgive these misguided souls. To help him, he unfortunately grabbed one of his religious books to read from, and to prepare himself for prayer. Little did he know that the book he had just grabbed was cursed. When he opened it up and started to read, the DM said, quote, "Good job, you opened up the cursed book, and now your character is chaotic evil." The entire party just stared at him and said, "What the hell?" And the DM replied that there was a reason for this and that we'd enjoy it. He then told me that since I was no longer lawful good, my god had decided to pull back his blessings on me, and I was no longer a paladin. I assumed that this was going to be a plot hook for something bigger down the road, and I was actually excited and looking forward to seeing what the DM had planned. After that session, I texted the DM and asked if I should roll up a temporary character, perhaps another paladin or a cleric, or someone else who worshipped the same deity and was going to help my paladin return to his path. The DM simply replied, quote, "Since you aren't going to play a lawful good paladin, then I made it so you weren't a lawful good paladin. Lawful good means that whenever you see someone break the law, that you need to take action." I replied along the lines of, quote, "My paladin was following the rules of the land. You can't just have a stranger come into town and take the law into his own hands. That's how you would get lawlessness all over. He was letting those in the proper positions take care of the issues, especially since he was busy working with his order to purge it of heretics." The DM would not budge on his stance, and it led to me and him parting ways. I let the other party members know that I wasn't going to be joining the rest of the campaign because of that, and they agreed with me and let the DM know that they were leaving too. It would have been really interesting if the DM made me an oath breaker for a couple of sessions, while the party or someone else helped me restore myself in the eyes of my god, and return to the path of righteousness. But instead, I was punished for not playing my lawful good paladin as a paladin on a crusade to root out every single evil act that he came across. This DM is kind of a dick. Just because a character is inherently good doesn't mean he's going to become Batman and dish out vigilante justice whenever he's in a new town. Logically, you would assume that the local guard wouldn't really like that. Though logic isn't something this DM seems to have. Like OP said, changing alignment temporarily would be a pretty good hook, but it seemed like the DM just didn't like OP for not being Captain Justice. Hopefully OP and the other players find a better DM in the future. On to the next story. 18-month Nightmare Campaign by Reddit user Gwen Hawk. About a decade ago, I was a player in a Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition campaign, which was so horrible, so awful, that the details are burned into my memory. This is a long one, and I'm giving the abridged version. The campaign started at first level. When I finally quit, after about 18 months of weekly 6-hour sessions, usually with 2 to 3 combat encounters each, we just reached 6th level. I played a divination wizard. The other players were a monk and a rogue. Between us, we had every single skill at maximum proficiency and good ability modifiers. The DM set skill check DCs so arbitrarily high that we never succeeded on anything. The story was that we were escorting a chosen one and her DMBC bodyguard to a faraway city and doing quests in each town we visited, because thou must. The chosen one would heal us up between fights with her chosen one powers, which was helpful because we ended every single encounter unconscious on the floor. We'd wake up to the chosen one healing us up, the DMPC having killed the remaining enemies with her magical, one-of-a-kind revolver with infinite bullets. Our first quest had us clearing out a nest of monsters outside of an elven village. The elven major promised several hundred gold and a handful of potions as our reward. The dungeon was filled with Grell, basically tentacle monsters with beaks and taser sticks. After 8 or 9 encounters of getting electrocuted, bitten, and healed back up, we went back to the village, only for the mayor to summon 24 guards and kick us out of town empty-handed. This became the norm for our quests. Arrive in a new town, get asked to handle a problem, fight and lose 8+ encounters, then leave empty-handed. We couldn't refuse the quest because thou must. We couldn't ask for payment in advance because thou mustn't. For a group of townsfolk who couldn't handle their local problems, they sure did have a bunch of powerful armed guards ready to kick us out of town every time. In 18 months, the party received almost no rewards of any kind. The DM ensured that enemy weapons broke after they were downed. Their armor was ruined by battle, and they carried nothing of value on their persons. The few items of value we found were intentionally unusable by the party, like a +1 bastard sword or an intact suit of half-plate, stuff nobody could use effectively. Even in those cases, every vendor we found refused to purchase any of our equipment, magical or otherwise, not even for a fraction of its value. Our expenses, however, were very real. The monk ran out of money almost immediately, and the rogue and I had to start paying for their room and board. We stopped buying arrows almost immediately because we couldn't afford them. When we needed to board a ship, we had to sign up as hard laborers just to afford paying for the chosen one's ticket. My character started with about 100 gold pieces. By the end of the adventure, my character had less than 10. The DMPC, of course, always had enough to pay for her own expenses, but would never lend us so much as a bent copper piece. We had a +1 dagger with a unique property that could count as silver, cold iron, adamantine, etc., for the purpose of overcoming enemy damage reduction. But only one at a time, and changing type cost your action. Sounds good, right? Except the DM then threw monsters at us with extremely high damage reduction only overcome by one of those materials, unable to break through even with sneak attack damage, until he inevitably got pummeled into the ground. It also reduced the monk's damage to basically 0, but we were losing every fight already, so not much had changed. My divination wizard was essentially a commoner. My divination spells never revealed anything. Enemies were resistant or immune to the damage my spells did. My buff spells were counterspelled or dispelled almost immediately. When I started resorting to magic missile, every enemy had a shield cast on them. The players were restricted to content from the player's handbook, while enemy NPCs regularly had psionic powers, tome of battle maneuvers, vile feats, and random abilities that were clearly homebrewed or made up on the spot. Over the course of the campaign, we kept finding these blue crystal magic items that were very important to the plot. Unfortunately, we never found out what they actually did because the big bad or her minions would always show up right after we got one and take it from us effortlessly. In these rare cases, the DMPC would always have vanished or run off to protect the Chosen One, and would thus blame us for our failure once they got back. The big bad of the campaign was a female sorcerer of 13th level or higher who enjoyed teleporting in front of the party and taunting us. Any attempt at violence against her reduced the player character to 0 hit points instantly. No saving throw. The big bad would also hit on the monk relentlessly, which was really the DM hitting on the monk's player, despite him being a cis-straight guy, and her openly being a lesbian. When the monk player got a girlfriend, the DM stopped hitting on her. He then started dating a girl who looked just like the monk's player, and brought her into the game as a paladin. Paladin, naturally, had several magic items, no attributes below 16, bonus feats and features, and 2 paladin flunkies who followed her around and protected her in combat. In addition, enemies started targeting Monk first and knocking her out, usually in the first round of combat. Shortly before I stopped playing, the DM revealed to me that the entire campaign was a book he had written before the game started, in which the Chosen One and the DMPC were the protagonist. Our characters weren't in his book at all, which certainly explained why none of our choices amounted to anything. Realizing that my presence at the table didn't even matter was the final straw. I told the DM that I wasn't having fun with the campaign, and he told me, quote, "I'm not here for you to have fun." That's when I finally left the campaign and stopped hanging out with the DM. The rogue quit the game a week after I did, upon learning what I'd learned. The monk stuck around for a bit longer, but eventually quit when the DM petrified her character and told her to sit quietly until she was unpetrified. She somehow managed to endure 2 whole sessions of coming to the table and sitting quietly, while DM and Paladin played a solo game, before she finally gave up and quit. Any decent campaign of D&D has at least one thing in common, and that is a sense of progression for the characters and the story. This DM kept holding a carrot of advancement in front of the players, only to pull it away at the last second every time. And of course, the DM had a DMPC that, of course, was perfect in every way. Then to find out that this was a story the DM was writing that he just plopped the players into, so they had no impact whatsoever, would have been the last straw for me as well. If you want to write a book, then write a book. D&D is supposed to be fun for everyone involved, something I guess this DM never considered. Though, what are your thoughts? Let's get into the last story. DM tried to force me into a character I didn't want, by Reddit user Tales of the Past. A little backstory. I had never played D&D before, but wanted to try it. My boyfriend at the time played with his friends in real life, and invited me to join their new game. I liked all of his friends except for the DM. DM was one of those edgy, I'm an asshole so deal with it types, but I decided to give it a shot anyway. I am a woman, that will be relevant. The game was going to be a futuristic cyberpunk setting that focused on stealth. During character creation, I wanted to be a lizard man, to which the DM scoffed and was like, quote, "No, you can't be a lizard." When I asked why, he said, quote, "That's furry shit. Why do you want to be a lizard?" I told him I just really like lizards and thought it would just be fun since it's a fantasy game. To which he said, quote, "Okay, tell you what, you can be a lizard, but you have to take a flaw that will make you easily killable. Because being a lizard, you would be easily detected." I was like, no thanks. Kinda defeats the purpose, no? Also made no sense about easy detection when my boyfriend was playing a woman with glowing rainbow feathers for hair. So I asked about what species he will allow, which are only humanoid, but include people with animal features, anime catgirl style. Asking about this, he was like, quote, "No, it's not furry, it's different." Fair enough. I then wanted to play a man with rabbit features, to which he also shot down with, quote, "You have to play a female." I responded with, "What? Why? We don't have enough female characters, and it would balance it out." I wasn't intending on any romance or anything, but still, he refused. So I decided it would just be better to back out of the campaign. Everyone seemed a bit disappointed, and the DM kept trying to get me to join, but I was already feeling some red flags. I offered to be the group artist, and I would draw out relevant scenes here and there, which everyone really enjoyed. Turns out, it was a good thing that I didn't join. Sitting in on the campaign and just drawing, my boyfriend became the group punching bag. Anything he did in the game was met with insults, and the DM loved to punish the whole party whenever my boyfriend made any kind of mistake. I would talk to him at home about how it wasn't right and he should stand up for himself, but he insisted it was fine, and his friends just joked like that. But the cruelty was seriously only ever directed at my boyfriend, and I could tell it bothered him. I also later found out the reason I had to play a female was because another player had a crush on me and intended to flirt with me in game, to which the DM found hilarious and wanted to watch my boyfriend be uncomfortable because I would have been uncomfortable. I also sat in for a one-off they did, where DM's sibling played a chaotic neutral character that would attack and heal both party members and enemies at random, without reason. DM thought this was hilarious and praised his sibling for, quote, knowing how to actually play chaotic neutral. Just seemed like everyone else was having a bad time. I really lost respect for the group over time, especially the DM, and came to games less and less until my boyfriend and I broke up. On good terms, we just weren't right for each other. All in all, not the worst thing, but glad I avoided actually joining the game and Doge having an even worse story. I found a group some years later, and we've been playing together for a couple of years on and off. I play a big, dumb, lovable lizardman barbarian named Dwarf, and I hope that my ex has since stood up for himself with his group. God, this story is so freaking cringy. Setting up a game just to let a player hit on another player's girlfriend in-game, only to then gang up on that player when his girlfriend ended up not playing due to character constrictions is pretty freaking pitiful. And the DM being in on it just to watch people get uncomfortable is just kind of sinister. I'm glad to hear that OP no longer has contact with this group and is finally able to play a character she wanted to play. And that, ladies and gents, concludes this collection of cringy and horrible DM D&D horror stories. Have you ever had a bad DM that went to the lengths that these had? If so, feel free to vent about it in the comments. We're all friends here. If you have a story that you would like to be read on the channel, be sure to post it in the comments on the channel subreddit r/D&D Doge, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and remember to always show appreciation for the good DMs in your life. Until next time.